CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Further signs of easing for US inflation. Consumer prices post their biggest monthly decline since April 2020.
Our other headlines: Russia removes its top army commander in Ukraine months after he was installed. A new general is now appointed to lead the military campaign in a major shake-up.
Looking beyond the pandemic, business leaders meet on a mission to boost trade between China and the EU.
And wooing back the big spenders after COVID, how top stores are using social media to target Chinese shoppers.
US consumer prices have fallen in the biggest monthly decline in more than 2.5 years, suggesting that inflation is on a sustained downward trend.
December's consumer price index dropped for a sixth consecutive month to 6.5%. That's down from 7.1% in November. It's set to have a big impact on markets by shaping expectations of interest rate hikes in the world's biggest economy. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. John, looks like a bit of a mixed CPI report.
Yes, it's funny how these things work out, because yesterday I'm in the newsroom now, as you can see, but I was down on the floor of the exchange yesterday for our Washington, D.C. version of this program. And there was I haven't experienced this for a long, long time. There was a real sort of frisson of excitement on the floor. People were buying left and right from what I could overhear. It's not always easy to hear what they're saying. And that was because there was a rumor going around yesterday, Wednesday, at the exchange, that actually this figure was going to be really great and it was going to be, really strong, and that the markets were likely to take off like a rocket. Well, in the end, it didn't quite work out that way. So my way of saying it to you is that the CPI, the Consumer Price Index figure, was good, okay, but it wasn't great, and Wall Street had been expecting it to be great. And I think what's happening now on Wall Street is that the markets are all over the place. They're going sharply down, sharply up, and I'll tell you more about that in just a second. But let's have a look at the actual numbers. So here we go. The main headline, year on year, okay, so December to December, US inflation was ahead by 6.5%. Now, remember, it was 9% in June. So clearly, it's going in the right direction. That is good. It was 7.1% in November, so clearly, again, in the right direction. And if you take out food and energy, which gives you what they call the core CPI, then it was 5.7%. So again, that's very good. Well down from where it was earlier in the year, but a long way from where the central bank wants it to be at about 2%. Now, this is where the slight confusion comes in, because if you look at this figure month on month, if you go from November 2022 to December 2022, well, there was no inflation. Now, let me be absolutely clear about this, okay? The figure shows that it was negative 0.1. Now, clearly, there was inflation out there, but the official figure shows that there was none between November and December. And if you take out what they call the core, if you go to the core, food and energy, they've gone, then it was up 0.3%, which is not very much, and that is exactly where economists had thought it would be. So in summary, food and shelter remain elevated. Energy and things like used cars are certainly coming down. Now, the problem we have here is the weekly jobless numbers, which is a key piece of jobs data, came in very weak. It was expected that 215,000 Americans would sign up for first-time unemployment benefit as of last Saturday, and it was only 205. Now, that's pretty staggering, because that's the second week in a row in which it's been very low. And remember, the authorities want people to be laid off so that the companies are calming down and inflation calms down, and the job market is going gangbusters, as this figure clearly shows. So that is why today, ahead of this figure, we had the markets up by, or the Dow anyway, ahead by 200 points. Immediately afterwards, it was down by 200 points. Then it was up 60 points. And right now, it's in the green by about 80 points and moving all the time. People just don't know what to make of this figure quite.
So why are they so jittery?
Well, I think the thing is, I think we can say with some certainty that inflation here in America has peaked. Okay, so we don't need to worry about that anymore. It certainly has. You know, it was up at around 9% in June, and now it's down to 6.5% in the month of December. So clearly, it is heading in the right direction. And the real worry about prices going up here and affecting ordinary people is obviously coming to an end. We do know that. But the problem is that Wall Street worries, and they have had this bags of experience of this over the years. They worry that the central bank will go too far and force a recession, which Wall Street thinks is not necessary. Now, the problem is that central banks can only rely on data, which is always time-lagged. You know, they can only look at the stuff which was really relevant a couple of weeks ago by the time they're actually reading it. That's the problem. And Wall Street wants the central bank to be bold and to say, OK, we'll stop raising interest rates, or we won't raise interest rates by as much as we thought we would. But Wall Street worries that that isn't going to happen. That's the problem. So the next date to look out for is the 1st of February. That's when the central bank will meet. They'll meet on the 31st. They'll decide on the 1st. And until this happened this morning, we thought it might be a 25 basis point increase. We had 50, remember, in December, and we had 4 jumbo-sized 75 hikes in 2022 in total. So they were hoping for 25 basis points, or even a pause, which, by the way, I don't think they'll get. But these figures today, I'm afraid, cast that all in doubt. It looks like it could be 50 basis points, which the markets think is unnecessary. So there's a battle between Wall Street and the central bank. And just finally, if I may, President Biden has just commented on all of this, and he said that there is economic progress being made, but there is more work to do. Jamie and Robin?
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
So how have European stocks reacted to those CPI numbers? Well, they were higher on Thursday as investors appeared to welcome the drop in US inflation. Over in France, the CAC finished the day up 0.8% higher. In London, the FTSE was up 0.9%, and Germany's DAX was up just over 0.75%.
Well, China's top economic planner says the government managed to keep consumer prices stable last year, despite inflationary pressures and other challenges. Officials say prices should remain consistent this year, too. Our correspondent Gao Ang reports.
Stabilizing commodities, energy prices, and market expectations. China's top economic planner looking back on 2022 on the measures introduced to ensure price stability.
In 2022, we improved the mechanism used to manage expectations in order to stabilize the market. We also released policy information and regulatory signals in a timely manner, enhanced joint supervision of futures and spot markets, and curbed excessive speculation.
According to the National Bureau of Statistics, China's consumer price index rose 2% year-on-year in 2022, much lower than the record inflation levels in the U.S. and the Eurozone. Officials say focusing on stabilizing grain and hog prices, as well as energy, were among some of the key measures.
Looking forward to 2023, although international commodity prices may fluctuate and remain high, and imported inflationary pressures still exist, there is a solid foundation for China's prices to remain stable. With continuous bumper harvest in grain, sufficient supply of important livelihood commodities, and strong basic energy security, we are confident that we can keep overall prices stable.
Energy prices rose sharply worldwide in 2022, with many countries going through energy crisis. Facing complex challenges and risks, officials said China will continue to focus on keeping the coal prices stable to ensure the overall stability of energy prices. Gao Ang, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, let's talk now to Mark Oswald, who's Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM Investor Services. Welcome back to the programme, Mark. Good to have you with us. So these numbers in the US look like inflation is on the way down. Can we say it's peaked? Is it now a downward trend?
It's on a downward trend, but it depends on how far. I think the disappointing elements of it were that housing and particularly household utility pressures aren't really dissipating as much as many people have been anticipating. They will start to dissipate more in coming months. But the real question in terms of the central is in terms of the central bank, and the central bank won't be happy with the fact that if you look at the measures they look at, which is annualizing the 3 month change in CPI, which is 3.1 still, and the 6 month is still 4.5. They want to basically hit 2. And what they're concerned about primarily at the moment is it gets to 3 but not 2, and that would be above their target, so they feel they will be beholden to keep on tightening interest rates.
So you say the Fed won't be happy about these figures. What else will the Fed be considering when it comes to interest rates?
Well, they'll certainly be looking at the labour market. They've got a tough task there because the labour market is very, very tight. Labour demand is still very strong. But part of that is due to demographics. We know that a lot of people have been retiring early because of the pandemic. And that basically means there is going to be this persistent labour skills shortage, which is complex because if you've got a shortage of labour supply and inflation, you're going to keep the underlying wage pressures on the wrong side of where they'd like them to be. And that's really what they've got to make the judgment for.
On the surface, though, things look pretty good, don't they? We've got inflation potentially improving, energy prices on the way down. So what are the main issues for the US economy at the moment?
Well, what we're looking at in terms of forward-looking indicators in terms of demand, above all in the manufacturing sector and the services sector, is that orders do seem to have fallen actually very sharply towards the end of the year. And there's a forward-looking measure that does suggest the US is definitely a risk of recession in the not-too-distant future, certainly by the second half of the year. This may be, on the other hand, temporary. Those measures are... There's too much being read into, as far as I'm concerned, 1 month's change. And sometimes you can actually get very errant readings. But at the moment, there does seem to be quite a sharp loss of momentum, and a lot of that actually has to do with the rise in interest rates and the overall inflation pressures which companies are having to absorb now.
And what does this all mean for the strength of the US dollar?
Well, I think it's the strength of the US dollar is in part because of the relative interest rate differentials to most other countries. Particularly developed countries. But if we get into a situation where the Fed is about to stop and the ECB still seems to be on a tightening path, then one can certainly say that it's likely that the dollar is likely to lose some of the luster that it had. The only counter to that is that the world has a big global debt problem, and most of that debt is denominated in dollars. So the rest of the world will be still chasing dollars to pay down the debt that they've got.
Mark, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us today. That's Mark Oswald from ADM Investor Services.
Britain's largest retailer, Tesco, posted better than expected Christmas sales, with the supermarket also registering its biggest trading day on record. Sales grew 7% in the 6 weeks to January the 7th. And in-store sales were particularly strong, but the company's boss has warned 2023 will be tougher as customers tighten their budgets amid the cost of living crisis.
Climate activists say the UK could face another banking crisis if it doesn't prepare for a possible collapse in the value of fossil fuels. A report by campaigners says some businesses may struggle to adapt to climate regulations, leaving serious consequences for investors. The report warns of potential job losses and bank bailouts.
Elon Musk has earned a place in the history books for the largest loss of personal fortune in history. The Twitter and Tesla boss is estimated to have lost around $180 billion since 2021. Musk was the world's richest man, but most of his fortune was in Tesla stock, which lost more than half of its value last year.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Russia's most senior general is appointed to lead Moscow's war in Ukraine in a dramatic series of changes to senior command.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freevee.
Russia has removed its top commander in Ukraine after just 3 months in the job. General Sergei Surovikin is being replaced by Valery Gerasimov, Russia's longest-serving chief of the General Staff. Russia's defense ministry says the reshuffle was needed to organize closer interaction between troops in Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's leader has again rejected claims that Russian troops have taken control of a key town in the east of the country. President Zelensky says fierce fighting is continuing around Soledar.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, Russia's military chiefs coming under attack at home for recent losses in Ukraine. How significant is this shuffle, this new appointment?
Yeah, it's the biggest one that we've seen since February, and it means that there is now a commander who was previously in charge, lost his job. He's now back at the top spot, General Gerasimov, and it means the person who was only in charge for 3 months is now back in his old job as commander of the aerospace forces, which he's been doing since 2017. So he's now, in effect, seen a demotion, but the Ministry of Defense is not portraying it as such. It says this is a reshuffle to try and make sure that the special military operation, as it's known here, continues as effectively as possible. It says that this reshuffle will achieve 2 things. Firstly, it will expand the scale, due to the expansion of the scale of the tasks of the special military operation. This will be more streamlined, and also this will allow closer interaction between different branches of the armed forces. Now, one of the deputy commanders, who is now in charge of the ground forces, is already on his way to Belarus. They're inspecting troops, of course Belarus being the country where Russian armed forces use as a staging ground, but there's no other broader implication, at least from the Ministry of Defense, about what's going to happen next with the major reshuffle. However, it is saying, as is the Kremlin, that another mass mobilization is not on the cards, despite rumors and despite fears of that being on the cards here in Moscow.
Stuart, both sides claiming the upper hand in Soledar. Why is this town so significant for Russia?
Well, we heard again from one of the important officials when it comes to this, the de facto leader of the Luhansk People's Republic, one of those regions of Russia where Russian officials are now in charge, but previously Ukrainian. Now, this place is very close to the fighting, and it says, the leader of the Luhansk People's Republic says that this is an important site, not in itself strategically for Russia, but because it acts as a place which, once under the control of Russian forces, if indeed it becomes so, it will be useful for going to other places which are strategically important. Now, that's slightly different from the take of the leader of the private military organisation Wagner, who believes Soledar has its own benefits, notably the salt mines, which he believes could be useful in protecting Russia's equipment, ammunition and soldiers deep underground, of course, protected from any kind of shelling by Ukraine. But indeed, this is seen as a stepping stone to further, quote, liberation that Russian forces expect to be able to undertake in future. However, despite claims on Tuesday that this place was taken by the private military organisation, the Ministry of Defence says no such thing has happened just yet, although it's confident that the town is surrounded by Russia's forces.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
The UK and Poland have confirmed they are planning to send modern heavy tanks to Ukraine. Britain has indicated that up to 10 of its Challenger 2 tanks could be sent to Kyiv in the coming months. The Polish president says his country is ready to send German-made Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine if the move has international support. It will be the first time such heavy weaponry has been sent to Kyiv by European nations since the war began. It comes as Ukrainian troops hold drills close to the Belarus border amid fears that a Russian attack from the north may be imminent. Well, the centre of the fighting in Ukraine remains around Bakhmut, but shells continue to fall across the east. A maternity hospital came under fire in the city of Kherson on Wednesday. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed is there.
Well, here in Kherson, there have been ongoing strikes throughout the day. They're continuing now. 27 and counting strikes in the past 24 hours here in the city. One person was killed here in those strikes. 5 people are in serious condition. These are coming from multiple rocket launchers, rocket launches, artillery. It's a combination of weaponry that's being used in this whole area. Earlier in the day, we saw a Ukraine fighter jet flying very low. So the fighting on both sides, but that's not common to see. But the Ukraine fighter jet, of course, hitting Russian positions. And then speaking with someone here in Kherson, she's been here since last February throughout Russian control of the city, and then when Ukraine's military moved back in and took control. And she said she's absolutely in the past 2 weeks seen an uptick in the fighting and the intensity here in Kherson. The issue here with this city is the proximity to the Russian forces. I mean, from where I'm standing right now, they're 1,000 meters away. And that's the issue in general in Kherson City. No warning, very close fighting, launching heavy weaponry, and it comes within seconds. We took a closer look at that, and I'd like to share that with you. Central Kherson, a maternity hospital hit by a Russian strike. There are no casualties, the chief physician tells us. She was in the hospital when the artillery hit. She's been living here since her home was destroyed by shelling. Blocks away, deep inside an underground bunker, Kherson's acting mayor issues updates. Concrete walls and an ever-present flak jacket are necessities. Kherson's elected mayor disappeared in the spring after refusing to cooperate with Russian occupying forces. Her house was torched after she also refused to collaborate. Municipality administrators tasked with restoring power and water to shell-damaged areas can't help everyone.
Sub-power stations out in open areas are under constant fire, so it's impossible for repair specialists to access them. The minute they go out, they're targeted by snipers.
Relentless mortar, artillery, rocket and missile strikes since Russia's military pullback in November have killed dozens here. An estimated 120 residents abandon the city each day. Local officials say 100% of those who remain rely on aid.
I stand here in line for I don't know how long. They can suddenly say we're closed. We're not accepting anyone anymore.
Measures to safeguard Kherson residents include installing a 50-ton mobile concrete shelter in the city center. But scrambling to safety inside before an artillery hit is unlikely.
What's noticeable in Kherson compared with other cities is there aren't any air raid sirens before the hits, and that's because there isn't any time for alerts. From where I'm standing right now, the closest Russian position is 1 kilometer away.
Ongoing warring and a potential winter Ukraine military advance across the river separating Russia and Ukraine's armies are prompting a drive to get locals out. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Kherson, Ukraine.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, US House Speaker Kevin McCarthy faces a new crisis as the government approaches its borrowing limits.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: further signs of easing for US inflation as consumer prices post their biggest monthly decline since April 2020. Our other headlines: Russia removes its top army commander in Ukraine months after he was installed. A new general is appointed to lead the military campaign in a major shake-up.
The EU Chamber of Commerce in China is holding its first in-person meetings in 3 years this week as China reopens its borders. The body represents the interests of European companies in China, and it's hoped the relaxation of COVID measures will bring a boom in trade. 2021 trade figures show that more than 10% of EU goods went to China, making it the third most important destination for European exporters. And goods coming from China to the EU make up 22% of what Europe imports. So what do the two economies trade? Well, it's mostly machinery, vehicles, chemicals and agricultural goods. And 2022 saw some major deals signed. German chemical company BASF said it would invest $10 billion into a new site in China's Guangdong province. And the world's largest EV battery maker, CATL, said it would invest over $7 billion to build a battery plant in Hungary. According to some estimates, European foreign direct investment into China has become more concentrated 4 countries, Germany, the Netherlands, the UK and France, make up almost 90% of total investment since 2018. Well, our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels for us. So, Alex, talk us through what's been happening today.
Well, perhaps unusually, we were at the media roundtable for the European Chamber of Commerce in China, and it was quite moving. It's not something you would expect from a business roundtable. These are usually quite formal affairs, quite straightforward. It was quite moving because a lot of these executives haven't been able to come back to Europe for 3 years, and we have stories of missed graduations and missed family events. So that was perhaps one of the surprising aspects. Other than that, they've been having very high-profile meetings here in Brussels. Vice President Dombrovskis was one of them. The newly appointed Chinese ambassador Fu Song was also had a meeting with the delegation as well as parliamentarians from the European Parliament, and the head of cabinet for Josep Borrell, the Foreign Affairs Minister for the European Union as well. So these kind of around Brussels meetings with some high-profile dignitaries for the first time in person in 3 years, as you said. Inevitably and understandably, the conversation then moved on to business, and there are actually quite a lot of frustrations expressed by those European businesses and the representatives of European industry in China. They are frustrated with some of the restrictions on their ability to conduct business. There are 3 main points. Now, they published a report with over 900 recommendations. I will not be going through all 900 for you today. The top 3, just to save time, market access, still a problem. You can't do mergers and acquisitions in China if you're a European company like you would in Europe or in North America or other places in the world. The equity cap, so the limit to which European companies can have equity in any particular company in China, is also stunting their ability to really grow their business and grow investment in China. And then finally, difficulties with the legal system and legal interpretations are things that these companies really struggle with. So those were the kind of key focuses. What that shows is an appetite for European companies to be doing more investment, more presence in China. Foreign direct investment into China from Europe at the moment is about the same as foreign direct investment from China to Texas. So comparatively, not a massive market there. And this is one of the things the President of the Commission said. He said, well, China is a huge economy, but not a massive market for European companies at this stage. Having said that, they also celebrated the reopening, the lifting of the restrictions. They were looking forward to being able to travel back and forth for Chinese executives to come to Europe, European executives to go to China and build those trade relations. So that is the hopeful aspect of it. There were some frustrations, but also looking forward to being able to do more business. Let's have a listen to Jens Eskelund. He was the Vice President of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. Here's what he had to say.
I think there's a lot of excitement right now and relief. It has been 3 incredibly hard years for European businesses, and one of the biggest frustration really has been that we have not been able to see really light at the end of the tunnel. When were the policies going to change? We know that now. China is going through a hard time presently, but we also now can see that there's an end to the hardship.
So with this easing of COVID restrictions and China reopening, can we expect to see an increase in trade?
Well, yes, in a word, says the Chamber of Commerce. That recap, we are going through a hard time presently, but we can see an end to the hardship, really summarises the mood for European businesses in China. They're still worried about the situation as it stands currently, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, is what they were saying to me today. So Q1 2023, they don't imagine to see a roaring boom, a roaring bounce back quite yet, because there are still some issues there. Having said that, they are hopeful for the rest of 2023, and they are really urging the Chinese government to continue on its path of opening up the economy, allowing more foreign investment, allowing more foreign companies to operate in China. They see a real mutually beneficial opportunity both for European businesses and China in the coming months and maybe in the coming years. So that was the message very clearly from European businesses in China. They're very glad to be able to be travelling back to Europe, some of them seeing their families for the first time in 3 years, but they would like to see more progress on business and trade cooperation between Europe and China.
Alex, thanks very much. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels.
Well, let's talk to Isabel Hilson, founder and senior advisor at China Dialogue. Isabel, welcome back. Good to have you on the programme. Well, let's start with a sit-rep, to use the vernacular. What's the current state of trade between China and Europe?
Well, despite everything, and there has been a lot in the last 3 years, I have to say it remains extremely important to both sides and pretty robust. The European Union remains China's biggest trading partner, and some very big companies operate in China. Investment from Europe to China remains pretty solid. So, it could be worse, but there has been quite a lot of difficulty in the last 2 or 3 years from a number of sources when people couldn't travel and couldn't meet. So I really want to echo what we've just been hearing about for the people on this delegation personally. That's been an enormous strain. And Jörg Wittke, who is leading it, has often complained about it on a personal level. So we have to be happy for them that they will see families and they are having real conversations now.
The ground has been shifting rapidly of late in EU-China economic relations, but there are challenges ahead, clearly.
Yes, I mean, if you look back to pre-pandemic days and look at, if you like, the image of China in Europe and today, it's really very different. China's very low in public opinion polls, and that has a number of causes. Very aggressive diplomacy on China's part, wolf warrior diplomacy. Then we've had mutual sanctions. We've had the collapse of the enormous trade and investment treaty because of those sanctions. We've had very severe difficulties with individual members of the European Union. Lithuania comes to mind. So there are a lot of things that are that really have to be overcome if this relationship is to thrive as it should. So it's complicated at the moment, and this is a very welcome first step. But I think there's quite a way to go.
The European Union Chamber of Commerce in China having this European tour this week, a number of meetings being held with EU officials. Do gatherings like this really help to reset relationships, or are they just window dressing?
No, I think they're quite important. We heard in your previous speaker mentioned the annual report that the EU Chamber in Beijing produces, and it's well worth reading, actually. So the most recent one had long sections on dynamic zero COVID and the difficulties that had created. Now that's over, but there were more than 900 recommendations. And if you look at them, they're to do with market access, they're to do with opaque policy making in China, they're to do with difficulties that companies have in various aspects of their operations in China. They're to do with concerns about divergence. These companies, particularly the big German companies like Volkswagen and BASF, they operate all around the world and they have to conform to international standards of accounting and so on, and environmental accounting increasingly, and that affects their supply chains in China. So there is plenty of work to do to persuade European companies that China remains a friendly place to operate. It's been very difficult. Now, what they will be doing on this tour is sharing their concerns with European leaders so that this feeds into the policy of the European Union at the highest level. And the European Union will be invited to support these businessmen in what they hope to achieve to make working conditions better. And that is robust policy making, and I think we will see the results of that in future discussions at EU level and China level.
Isabel, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming back on the programme. Isabel Hilton, the founder and senior advisor at China Dialogue.
Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang is heading to Angola, the third stop of his 5-country African tour. On Thursday, Qin Gang ended his visit to Gabon, where he called for closer ties. Our correspondent Mark Kerr reports.
The Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang has wrapped up his trip in Gabon as the second leg of a 5-country visit to Africa. He has met with the Gabonese President Ali Bongo and Foreign Minister Michael Moussa. Qin Gang also held a press conference with his Gabonese counterpart after a brief closed-door meeting. Qin said the two sides have similar standpoints in multiple international and regional affairs, and that China wishes to conduct more collaborations with Gabon under the framework of international organizations like the United Nations in order to achieve real multilateralism and uphold the basic norms of international relations. He said the two sides should maintain communication at all levels, sharing experience in governance, and continue to uphold each other's core interests and major concerns, including sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. Let's hear more from the scene.
China and Gabon share a traditional friendship and important partnership. We value relations with Gabon deeply, and we're willing to work hand in hand with Gabon to promote our comprehensive partnership to the next level. This is the main purpose of my visit.
Well, this is Qin Gang's first overseas trip as Chinese foreign minister. As he himself mentioned earlier, this is in accordance with diplomatic traditions of the Chinese government of 33 years to send its top diplomat to African countries right after the new year. After leaving Gabon, the newly appointed Chinese foreign minister will be visiting Angola, Benin, and Egypt on Friday and over the weekend. And he's expected to meet state leaders, high-level officials, and pay a visit to the headquarters of the League of Arab States. My colleagues in Angola and Benin will keep you updated of the diplomatic talks there.
The White House says a new batch of classified documents has been found in the garage of Joe Biden's home in Delaware. The documents date from his time as vice president, and the discovery comes after an earlier batch was found last November. Our correspondent Nathan King reports.
If you just look at the headlines, this looks like an equivalent case of what's been dogging Donald Trump and the missing classified documents in last year, where essentially his Mar-a-Lago residence was raided when they found 15 boxes of classified material. Joe Biden's documents in a think tank office here in Washington, D.C. that were found by staffers. But there really is a big difference here. Joe Biden says he was surprised they were discovered. He seems not to know what they were. Also, when the staff found them, they immediately alerted the National Archives, which, of course, is this body that looks after classified documents after a presidential term. Also, they've surrendered these documents and are going through an inquiry which may involve the Department of Justice. But, of course, politically for Joe Biden, this looks essentially like a false equivalence, where there were raids on the former president's home, even though there was huge amounts of resistance from Donald Trump from turning over these documents. He knew he had them. Joe Biden says he didn't. But the political hay being made out of Republicans is strong as well. And also, it's an own goal for the Biden administration. Why did these Obama-era documents find their way into the personal papers of the former vice president? And they were discovered a week before the midterm elections, but there was no public announcement here from the White House. It was actually discovered by the U.S. network CBS. That suggests that they were trying to bury the news that could have, of course, damaged them politically. So all this has to work out. But at the moment, the White House is saying, look, there's nothing really to see here. The documents are going back where they're meant to be. Joe Biden didn't really know about them. Staffers, when they found them, are returning them. Now, what's in them? Well, we don't exactly know, but we understand from reporting here in the U.S. that it does contain details of meetings with foreign leaders and foreign affairs on the closing of the Obama administration. Embarrassing at the least, a problem politically, obviously, but it doesn't look like he tried to shift loads of boxes of documents out of the White House and resist turning them over like his predecessor, Donald J. Trump. Nathan King, CGTN, just outside the White House.
US Congress is finally in session this week after a standoff over electing the new Speaker of the House brought government business almost to a standstill.
On its agenda, a looming battle over money that lawmakers fear could be far more damaging. Our correspondent Owen Fairclough reports.
Kevin McCarthy finally with the gavel as the new Speaker of the US House of Representatives, the most senior Republican in Congress.
That was easy, huh?
His personal battle with party rebels who forced major concessions from him in exchange for their backing are over for now. But the country's problems might just be starting.
Kevin McCarthy's historic but bruising battle to become the new Speaker of the House of Representatives has arguably left him vulnerable by bowing to an ultra-conservative faction in the Republican Party that would allow just one lawmaker to fire him. But others are more concerned about the bigger picture and say that it's the US, and by extension the global economy, that are really in danger.
The US government is about to hit the maximum amount it can borrow to keep the country running. Known as the debt ceiling, it was set at just under $31.4 trillion in 2021. So Congress must agree to a new threshold. But some of McCarthy's rebels are threatening another insurgency by refusing to a new limit without spending cuts.
We have to open this debate up, offer amendments, do our work, limit spending within our means, and then move the country forward.
The majority of the votes cast.
Democrats fear any delay on raising the ceiling could cause the US to default on its debts, sending shockwaves across the world because the dollar and American economy are such an integral part of the global economy.
If they follow the logic to its manifestation, this will pit Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid against defense spending. Our seniors will be sold out, our military will be sold out, and the full faith and credit of the United States will be under threat.
In a similar standoff over the debt ceiling in 2011, credit rating agency Standard & Poor's downgraded Washington's top-tier rating, a major blow to its financial reputation. Republicans say they're worried about the debts the US is quickly accumulating now that post-pandemic growth is slowing and interest rates are rising, adding to those borrowing costs.
The American people elected Republicans to get our fiscal house in order, and get our fiscal house in order we will.
The US public debt to gross domestic product ratio is forecast to soar to 185% by 2052. And when Greece went bankrupt in 2010, its debt to GDP ratio was 145%. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how some of the world's top stores are using social media to entice Chinese shoppers.
I fell in love with Chinese culture the second I started to experience it.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
Building bridges is a natural thing. There is no age and gender difference in our spirit, no race difference in our soul.
I think food is an incredible way of bringing different cultures together. I am enjoying learning every aspect about it.
Chinese literature stretches back for millennia, but it's still really relevant for today.
I hope that Chinese and British fashion community could be more frequently communicating with each other.
An incredible mix of people, cultures, food, and there is so much to see and so much to do.
I have a great desire to make the Chinese civilization more accessible.
It's about our future generation's future.
The craftsmanship, the technique, the material uses, the color uses.
You can kind of take things on board and continue to develop and grow.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Everything seems to have a story. I just think that's absolutely beautiful. A huge tick.
This week on Razor, the innovative company turning CO2 into stone. And we meet a family leading the way in sustainable mussel farming in the UK.
You can grow trees or seaweed or whatever else you want that takes carbon out of the atmosphere, but it releases it pretty quickly. With mussel shells or any other bivalve shell, it's millions of years, so we're taking it out of circulation.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The end of COVID restrictions in China has cleared a major obstacle for those wanting to travel abroad.
It's also created much excitement in the United States. Our correspondent Adise Tianshan reports now from California.
With China lifting its quarantine requirement for international travelers,
Many Americans with family or business links to China have already started making plans to visit the country, some for the first time in years.
You know, last year about this time you can go back, but let's just say it was crazy from a cost perspective, and all the hoops you have to jump through, even to go there. And once you go there, you can't come back out. This time, there are many people that are excited, including with us. You know, we're making plans to go back to China from a business perspective, some people from a personal perspective, because you can now, and it's exciting.
Lee's association oversees the relations between the U.S. city of Long Beach and the Chinese city of Qingdao as sister cities. She says they can finally resume some of their programs that had been postponed due to travel restrictions.
Our mission is to bring Qingdao to Long Beach and bring Long Beach to Qingdao. So like our ballet company, many students, many teachers, you know, we can start sending them back and forth again. And we're super excited about that.
There's much excitement among the hospitality industry, especially in parts of California that traditionally relies on big spending international tourists, particularly from China. Tourism workers believe the move could bring about a busier tourist season later this year.
It's like the first sprinkle of rain after a drought. By June, July, August, we should be seeing good, healthy, rebounding numbers of international visitors, particularly Chinese guests.
The coronavirus pandemic is far from over. China still requires a negative PCR test from travelers and maintains quotas for in- and outbound passengers. But the latest easing of international travel to China has created a glimpse of hope for families waiting to unite and businesses that rely on the world's second largest economy. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
With the easing of COVID rules, top-end stores around the world are wooing back international shoppers.
In London, social media is being employed by some to tempt back Chinese shoppers with cash to splash. Our correspondent Butchie Davey reports.
For almost 3 years, the only opportunity Chinese consumers had to shop in London's famed luxury stores has been through the internet. And while shops have worked hard to offer an online experience to match their reputations, there's no substitute for stepping off a chilly London street into the opulence of these British institutions. To add to retailers' challenges, as well as a surge in online competition, the pandemic also saw a surge in investment in high-end stores within China as shoppers stayed closer to home. Before borders closed as a result of the pandemic, Chinese shoppers bought 70% of their high-end goods abroad. Luxury department stores such as the UK's iconic Harrods have launched special stickers on the popular social media platform WeChat to mark the Chinese New Year of the Rabbit. They hope such campaigns will lure back shoppers despite new requirements from the UK and other European countries for COVID tests on passengers arriving from China.
We know as soon as we can open the gate. Now, it's not going to be a flood. It's going to be the airlines have got to get their schedules on board, people have got to get their passports renewed, people have got to get their visas. So it will be a gradual process. But towards the end of 2023, we see this as being a very, very significant build of business.
As well as its branded stickers for WeChat, Harrods is working with partners such as Beijing boutique Labelhood to boost its offering from Chinese designers.
Harrods is the shop window of the world. And that's a great thing for the Chinese people to be proud of and actually want to come and shop in Harrods.
Airlines are yet to resume full operations, with analysts warning that travel from China won't return quickly to pre-pandemic levels. But after 3 years with barely any visitors from China, retailers like Harrods are excited to welcome those who do make it. Butchie Davey, CGTN, London.
A corrupted database file has been blamed for the grounding of nearly 10,000 flights across the United States on Wednesday. The Federal Aviation Administration says the file affected both the main and backup computer systems, which provide safety information to flight crews. It caused widespread disruption, with thousands of passengers stranded. Flights have now resumed, but airlines warn that delays could continue into Friday.
German police are trying to remove hundreds of climate protesters from a site earmarked for a coal mine expansion. Activists have occupied the former village of Lutzerat for more than 2 years, saying the plan will lead to an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Greta Thunberg is expected to join the protest on Saturday.
The head of a major oil company has been named as president of this year's COP28 climate summit, prompting concerns from activists. Sultan Al Jaber is the boss of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Climate campaigners say it's a conflict of interest. They've accused fossil fuel producers of watering down proposals to cut greenhouse gas emissions.
Global warming is taking a heavy toll on the farming sector. The world lost an estimated 75% of its crop diversity in the 20th century, which could have serious consequences for food supplies.
In Colombia, at one of the world's biggest tropical seed banks, scientists are collecting and preserving seeds for future generations. Our correspondent Michelle Begue reports.
Marcela Santaella is a biologist working in the world's biggest tropical seed bank, located in Cali, Colombia. More than 67,000 tropical varieties of seeds from more than 100 countries are stored here. The facility is called Seeds of the Future, but what it holds is a window into the past as researchers study the genetic history that these seeds contain.
What we hold here is the diversity that is the result from selection of nature, or also farmers in decades or centuries before, and therefore we conserve the whole diversity or agrobiodiversity within the seed.
Santaella explains that genetic diversity is what will make crops resilient enough to withstand droughts, heat, diseases, and floods linked to climate change. The facility is a place where scientists collect and preserve seeds for hundreds of years and maybe longer. The seed bank is managed by the Alliance of Biodiversity International and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. It receives public and private sector funding.
We need options in terms of how plants react to climate change and can adapt to climate change. We need options to improve our crops, to make them more nutritious, to make them more resilient to pests and diseases, for example.
Scientists say our lack of crop diversity makes us very vulnerable to setbacks in the food supply chain. While 6,000 plant species are cultivated for food, the United Nations says 2/3 of crop production worldwide comes from just 9 plants, including wheat, rice, and corn.
Climate change is kicking in and affecting production. And at the same time, also, we want to produce perhaps more diverse and more nutritious food. And for all of these purposes, we need this genetic diversity that underpins crops, the crop diversity, to make progress towards these goals.
Researchers at Seeds of the Future not only store and study the world's rich biodiversity, but they also share the seeds. The gene bank provides free samples for farmers who want to plant more sustainable varieties of seeds that their ancestors once used. The seed bank is a living treasure for the whole world. To date, it has shared more than 500,000 samples to more than 140 countries. Michelle Begue, CGTN, Bogotá, Colombia.
The headlines again. Further signs of easing for U.S. inflation as consumer prices post their biggest monthly decline since April 2020.
Russia removes its top army commander in Ukraine months after he was installed. A new general is appointed to lead the military efforts in a major shake-up.
And looking beyond the pandemic, business leaders meet on a mission to boost trade between China and the EU.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.